Hi, I'm Ryan Szymanski, curator for Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial. We recently got asked how the battleship winterizes. This is a fairly open-ended question, so I'm going to answer it relatively quickly and try and cover as broad an area as possible. New Jersey is one of the more northern museum ships out there, which often limits our visitation over the winter and the amount of time we can work on exterior projects. However, I really need a disclaimer here that there are a number of museum ships further north than us, such as USS Slater, the fleet in Buffalo, the fleet at Battleship Cove, and all of these ships deal with significantly more winter than we do here. So first, let me start with how ships in active service deal with winter, because I'm not quite sure where this question was going. So, active ships have heat from their own engines and they're doing stuff. I'm not sure that they do too much to winterize those vessels. I'm sure there's things that ships that are going to be operating in specifically northern climates will do. For example, ventilators on the main decks might be sealed in some way to prevent all that cold air from coming in. But I'm not entirely sure. The big thing that I know is that when you're operating in freezing water, the water itself, the salt water in the ocean, when it's in all that mass, is liquid. However, when it comes up onto your ship, meets with the air, and is in these little droplets, it freezes almost immediately. So all of these ships you see during Atlantic convoy runs during World War II in the winter and things like that, just covered with ice all over the guns, the superstructure. Those open mount guns can't be trained to be moved. The depth charges can't be released off the back of the ships. The bridge windows are covered. It's just a mess. You can't fight a ship like that. But more critically, all that freezing water adds a tremendous amount of tide point that can cause the ship to sink. So the crew has to literally go out and break the ice off with sledgehammers and ice picks and other things like that to continuously chip it off of the railings, the guns, all these other things. Now, what about your manually operated guns or your depth charges? You don't want to just hit those to break the ice. You can take steam hoses, essentially using steam made by the boilers, the low pressure stuff, and use that to heat the ice that's frozen on your depth charges or your gears and things of your hand cranks for your guns and rangefinders and things like that you don't want to hit with a hammer. So those are your major things you can do. Battleship New Jersey has the same number of sailors who died as pneumonia as died in combat on board. So one of the most important things sailors can do is winterize themselves. So that's why you see, while deck jackets like this belong to the ship and are handed out in moderate weather, every sailor is issued with their own pea coat, which is a heavy waterproof winter jacket that is very common to the Navy. And you'll see wool watch caps and other things like that. There's a lot of clothing options that sailors have because they're not only in a cold environment, they're most likely going to get wet. I have started to put on my own winter coat, knowing that this year is going to be particularly cold. So I've been growing out my own insulation. So what do museum ships do to winterize? So one of the first things we do is we plan all of our maintenance projects around the weather. We know when it's going to start to get so cold that we get dew forming on the outside of the ship, condensate from the ship's own heat versus the moisture in the air, which means we don't want to paint when we know we're going to hit the dew point and that paint's going to become wet. Next, you get the frost point, where that dew freezes. Again, same issue. Makes it slippery and damages your paint. And our paint coatings don't stick at usually less than 50 degrees. So we plan all of our projects around the weather, knowing pretty well from our region when we're going to get that cold weather, whether it's September or November, depending on how far north the ship is, and when it's going to break in March or April. The next thing we do is we turn on the ship's heat. Originally, this ship would have gotten heat from her boilers. The steam that she's making the power of the ship, some of that gets siphoned off because it's 850 degrees and put through a system of steam radiators that is going to heat the ship. We don't run the ship's boilers. We're not allowed to. So we've got our own heating boiler here on the pier. So the heating boiler is continuously heating water and putting it up through the ship's radiator system. Originally, when the ship was first brought here, they used electric heat, just installing it on the ship, running off of the ship's electric. And one, not great to be putting all that power through our electric system. Two, really not good for our energy bill. Remember, we've got 1,600 rooms on this ship. We couldn't even heat just the tour route and office spaces. So a liquid natural gas heater has drastically reduced our heating costs lately. Now, the big problem is this is sending water onto the ship. What if we get a power outage that fails? Now, all the water in these pipes going up to the ship, and notice that they're heavily insulated, would freeze. When the water freezes, it bursts the pipes. That doesn't just count for the pipes down here between the ship and the pier, also the plumbing on the ship. I've seen the water in the toilet bowls on a ship that didn't have the heat set freeze to the point that expanded and cracked all the porcelain and caused a lot of damage to the plumbing that way. So it's vital that you run heat anywhere on the ship where you've got running water to keep the pipes from freezing. Many museum ships you go on will not be that warm. Typically 50 degrees is enough to keep the ship relatively comfortable and keep that done. That's what we did on my last museum ship. But with the effective liquid natural gas heat we've got here, we can keep the ship in the 65 to 70 degree range now. Not only is that better for visitors coming on board and staff working here, it's also better for the plumbing. If we do lose power, it's going to stay hot inside the ship longer. The ship is insulated. It will retain some of that heat for a period of time. If we lose the power for 12 hours, we should be fine. If we lose the heat for longer, we keep all of our other plumbing running on a trickle or drained. So, for example, sometimes when we close museum ships over the winter, we will completely drain all the toilets and other plumbing lines so that they cannot freeze. Good, but it's not great. You can never really drain it all. These ships were designed to drain by rocking back and forth at sea. And now that they're stationary, you still get low spots where the water sits. So it's not perfect. You might still have that water freeze, expand, and crack the really old pipes. The other thing we do is we wrap heat tape around the pipes. Heat tape basically just looks like an extension cord, and you just duct tape it onto the pipes and you put your insulation on over it. So when we are installing new plumbing, we usually wrap that and insulate it ready to go. And then in the winter, we plug it in. In the summer, we unplug it. Now, you can do the same sort of stuff with exterior plumbing at your own house, like garden hoses and things like that, or things in your garage that aren't heated and freeze. So another concern some ships have in winter is ice flow. That's less of an issue here in the mid-Atlantic. We will get a little bit of ice here on the Delaware River, especially on cold nights when it's not moving much, but it's not really a hazard to our ships. Further north ships, that is a problem. So they have often installed bubbler systems in the water that just agitates the water and prevents ice from forming around the hulls of their ships. If the ice forms around the hull of the ship and it's too thick, and then the tide's moving that ice, it might be pushing into the thin-skinned hull, and it could cause leaks or abrasion. At a minimum, it will abrade your coatings, your paint, which will then allow the steel to rust when it is wet, which will then cause, over years and years of operating these ships, holes to form. So bubbler systems are good. If you do get ice building up, you don't necessarily need an icebreaker to come in and break you out. In the past, when it's happened to us, we've got tugboat companies Moran is a local company here, and they work with us very closely. So there have been times when we've called over, and they've just sent a tugboat out to go around the ship and break up the thin ice here. And even they'll tie up to the pier and just sit there and run their propellers and push the ice flow away. Or they'll go out and do donuts in the middle of the river. So you can bust up ice that way if it's becoming too much of an issue. But a bubbler system is much more efficient if you've got continuous problems. Oftentimes in the winter, you get major storms. And one of the problems with ships is the storm surge. The Delaware River, where we are, is more or less oriented north and south. So if a storm comes up south-north or it comes down north to south, that may blow a bunch of extra water into the river, which will cause us to rise. Our mooring lines here are tied up specifically for the normal tide here, which is really only about 4 feet where we are this far up the Delaware. New Jersey is very lucky in being this far upriver in a relatively sheltered berth, as opposed to other museum ships that are closer to the ocean and have to deal with salt water. One good thing is salt water doesn't freeze as quickly. So our mooring lines are normally kept very, very tight. When we know there's a storm coming, we loosen those mooring lines so that the ship can still rise and sink. The storms surge, and the lines aren't going to be tight and then part, or tight and cause the ship to heel over, or tight and cause the mooring bits to rip out of the ship or the pier. All of those are problems that I've seen with museum ships. The one problem with this is you really have to tighten your lines down afterwards, or else the ship might be blown away from the pier far enough that your gangway drops into the river. That's a problem I've dealt with before, and I'm sure other museum ships have too, and non-museum ships for that matter. And it's really hard to keep a ship tight to the pier while you're doing this, because she's a big sail. The wind is pushing her. So again, that might be a situation where you have to call your local tugboat company and have them come out and help. And many times they'll do that pro bono. If you're calling them all the time, they might not do that. By far the biggest risk in winter on museum ships is ice on the deck. These ships are not warm enough on the inside to lose that heat to cause the ice to melt on the decks, especially where we've got poorly insulated bare steel decks. The wood helps with insulation to a certain amount, but not every deck is covered in wood. So ice forms, and that's not only dangerous to staff, it's dangerous to your visitors as well. So oftentimes you go out and you just buy salt and put it on the deck. That is bad for your deck because, one, as you're stepping on it and wearing it into the deck, you're taking paint off. Two, it is being washed into your drains, where now the rainwater is no longer fresh water, or the snow melt for that matter. It is now highly corrosive, very concentrated salt water. So that is bad. Sand is much better to put down if you can, but then it's a mess to clean up afterwards. It's just part of the risk-reward system that all of us museum ships weigh differently. When you are salting your steel ship, remember that sodium calcinate is a much better salt than, say, a sodium chloride or something like that. It is much less corrosive to steel. If you were salting the decks, wooden decks, or the decks of a wooden ship, sodium borate, Sodibo, is much better for that than any of your other salts. So it takes a little bit of chemistry to learn how these ships work too. And there are definitely things that are better and things that are worse. That's even worth remembering for things like your stairs and ladders going up to the ship, your gangways and piers, because, oh, it's not on the ship. We can use regular sodium chloride or whatever other types of brine that you're going to put down. But guests are going to get that stuck in their shoes. Yeah, look, my shoes are white already. And they're going to track that onto the ship, and it's going to cause corrosion. So probably best to just buy the one type you can. So that is by no means an exhaustive list, but some of the lessons I've learned working on museum ships in the mid-Atlantic in winter. If you know any other tricks for keeping your ships from freezing, let us know in the comment section down below. I've definitely put antifreeze in toilet bowls before to keep them from freezing. If you want to see how Battleship New Jersey fares in storms, remember that you can always see hot local single battleships on battleshipcams.com. There's a link in the description below. Battleshipcams.com has several views of cameras both on the battleship and around the battleship that lets you see a live, real-time feed of the ship. This way you can see just how much we're moving in storms or what the weather is here. It might even help you plan your trip out to the ship. It's not raining where you are at home, but maybe it's coming down here. For this video, consider donating to support the Buffalo and Erie Naval and Military Park or other northern museum ships. This winter is going to be particularly harsh, and many of those ships are not only shut down for winter without income, but also are going to face severe damage from these various winter storms. So we put a link down in the description if you'd like to donate to help them get through this rough season. You can support Battleship New Jersey by liking, sharing, and subscribing so more people find out about us and our channel. Thanks for watching.